52nd signal, and we're in Emporia, Kansas at the 12th Armored Division picnic. I want to start off with asking you, what was your childhood like when you were little?
Well, my dad died when I was 6, and my mother remarried when I was 9, and we were on a farm near Sumner, Oklahoma. And until I got into the service, I worked for my stepdad, and after I was 21, I got drafted. And we didn't go too long until I got into the 12th Armored Division. And first I was assigned to a radio school, and they said if you made one mistake you could get people killed, so I didn't want to stay with that. And they finally put me in as a messenger. And they used a messenger and assistant driver when we was in overseas in combat. And when the division moved, radio operation was in going. But when they stopped at a location, radio silence. And they had wire teams from the combat commands, but they didn't have the wire strung, so they used the messengers. And sometime there was some snipers in the woods yet, but the worst of it was they'd wake you at night. You never hardly got any rest right after move, until they got the wire through, and radio didn't operate until they was on the move again, so they wouldn't give away their position. So we saw the country, and the radio operators didn't see nothing. They didn't know what was going on. They rode in those closed trucks or half tracks, and we knew where we were at all times. And we didn't always get the right coordination on the map to find the unit at night, but we got through somehow. I got through every time I ever went out. My first assistant driver was scared in the dark, and he chickened out, and then they got me a good one. And we worked as a team. We were a good team, I thought. And, well, we had some close calls. They hit buildings when we was inside, and also when we was leaving. And well, once in a while we'd see them tracers. They went through the woods at night, but I never got hurt. They never hit us. So that's my experience with it.
Did you have any experiences directly relating to the Depression?
You mean depressions afterwards?
No, Depression prior to the war?
No. I didn't have any kind of problems like that.
Okay. What is your educational background thus far? You said you worked on the farm a lot, so.
Well, my folks came from Russia. It was from a German settlement in Russia, and my dad was the only one that got over to this country from his family. And his folks ended up in Siberia during World War I, so they never got away from there. And I never could see that name in any big phone book in cities I went to. And it seemed like we were only with that kind of name. And that's all it was.
What was the impact of Pearl Harbor on you and your family?
Well, I wasn't in the service at the time, but it didn't take long till I got in after that. It had an impact on the whole country, and us included.
What was your work experience? What exactly was your work experience prior to joining the Army?
Well, we had some young colts, and my stepdad wanted that broom broke, and we farmed wheat and and some row crops, some corn and calf corn. Yeah, that was my experience. And the fuel was making wood. And that was it.
You said that you were drafted. What was your experience when you were drafted into the Army, and what did you feel when you arrived at basic training?
Well, I don't know. It was different than what I had been doing. And I don't know.
What was camp life like for you?
Well, it was pretty good. Camp Camel didn't have buses to go anywhere. When we got to Texas, there wasn't no place, standing room in Abilene at that time for a big outfit like the 12. Long ways from town, there wasn't much for recreation there, I would say. I was single and I wanted to live it up a little bit.
What were your basic training activities like?
Well, we took all the basic training, machine gun, rifle, firing, cover and concealment, and just a general training, I guess.
Did you make a lot of friends in basic training?
Yeah, we was all in the same boat. Everybody was away from home. I made friends. I had one friend, he was a boxer, and he just kind of took care of me. He protected me and kept me out of trouble.
Well, that's good. What were the sergeants and officers that you remember from basic training?
Oh, some of me didn't like too well, but I guess it wasn't too bad.
Wasn't. What do you remember about being at Camp Campbell and Hellcat Camp that stands out in your mind the most?
There was mosquitoes, and that was about the worst thing.
And you said that Abilene didn't have much for you.
No.
Describe the barracks area that you stayed in.
The barracks, they was nice in Campbell. They was brand new. They was building them as we come in. And they had cold heat. It was kind of smoky and a lot of soot, but it was pretty good. It rained right at first. They marched us through water holes. Camp was new. You didn't know how deep the water was. Shoes sure took a beating.
Now, did you go to the Tennessee maneuvers?
Yes.
What were they like for you?
Well, it was pretty good. You got to go on a picnic and slept out under the stars. Rained some. The pup tents didn't always shed all the water. It wasn't too bad.
Wasn't too bad. What was your job in your unit? You said you were a messenger.
Yeah, well, after that little while they tried to make an operator out of me, and I closed that key so I didn't hear anything, and I didn't make very good scores, so then I got in as messenger.
So during the war, as a messenger, you basically were, what exactly was your experience?
Well, I just did what they told me to. They'd say, here's a message and a receipt, and you go to that unit. They timed when you got there, and they timed when you got back. And it was all. Waited till the next time they sent you out. It seemed like them night times was the worst.
Were you ever in contact with General Brewer?
No.
No.
We didn't see General.
So, when you were at Camp Barkley, did you ever go into Abilene on the passes that you would get, or?
Mhm.
What did you do when you get those passes?
Well, you could walk up the street, and there was a few dances, and there wasn't many recreation places. They had penny arcades. And I wasn't much of a dancer, so I couldn't get too much out of that. And it was too crowded, too many people in that camp for the cities around. Abilene is big now, I hear, but at that time, I don't know how, whoever said that was accurate, but they said it was about 30,000. And now it's probably 130,000.
Describe Camp Barkley and the 12th Area Division area as you entered Pershing Boulevard at the main gate. When you came in, what was the first thing that you saw?
At Barkley?
Uh-huh.
Well, we came in by rail, and we came in by the gate, you know, train. The first thing I saw was that little town, village of View, and it wasn't very big. If this is the size of Texas town, you're going to see much.
What do you remember about the maneuvers that you did in Texas?
In Texas, the most I remember was a 32-mile hike. And they started us at 4 o'clock and we went up on top of the hill through them little cedars, low cedars, and our company commander had changed. We got a new guy in there, he's a big fella. He says, I can't make it all the way, but I'll meet you at noon. So he walked back with us. But he didn't stay with us long.
So y'all changed company commanders
Oh,
after
yeah.
that?
Our company commanders kept graduating. We didn't lose too many officers that way, but we got new ones every once in a while.
Describe the train trip when you went to Camp Shanks.
Well, Camp Shanks, we wasn't there too long. We didn't really do much training. We got guard duty. They put a guard every few feet so somebody wouldn't go AWOL. I got one pass to New York City, and then I went to a smaller town in closer New Jersey, and they had a hurricane while we was there, and we must have been on the outside of this hurricane. It sure did rain, and it upset trees, big trees, and they must have been on some subsoil. Must have been rock with the bottoms of the trees, the roots were flat. And I was walking back to camp from this little town, and you know, oh, this tree's going to hit me. Oh well, what's one tree? You couldn't dodge them anyway. That was about the most I remember of Shanks.
So on your weekend pass, you didn't go into New York?
Yeah, I got one pass to New York City. Yeah. It was different. Seemed the Navy was there and they knew everywhere where everything was. You asked some sailor and he knew exactly where you could go, which subway to catch. I guess the Brooklyn Navy Yard must have been close there.
So what did you do on that pass that you got?
Well, the New Yorkers were different than Texas. They knew we was going overseas and the girls had welcomed you. In Texas, they had them soldiers there so long, they didn't care too much about you. Some of them did some harm in Texas, probably. And then we was outpopulated the population.
Describe your voyage across to Europe.
Do I?
Describe your voyage across to Europe.
Oh, it was different. Wasn't too bad for me. I made it pretty good.
your stay like that you had at the Tisworth Barrack in England?
We weren't in England very long.
Mhm.
They said a month in there, but we wasn't there that long.
Oh, really?
About 2 weeks, and then we drove our vehicles on LSTs and went across the channel and drove out on them platforms.
Describe crossing the channel.
Describe what?
Crossing the channel.
Oh, it wasn't bad because they were inland waiting. It wasn't rough at all.
Describe your landing at, you landed at La Harley?
Well, we went up the Seine River a little ways, and then there was a fellow with long whiskers, a Frenchman. He was a pilot, and he knew where all the snags were. He got us through there pretty good. And we drove out on the land. Wasn't much of a problem.
What is the thing that stands out most about your first combat experience running through?
Oh, our first combat, we was in a barn. This one fellow had a watch. They was blowing up these mines and minefields along. The engineers blew up these minefields different places, and they'd have it stopped. But we got into this little village, and we got in an old barn, and it was at night, and this one fellow says, the engineers had blown up these mines every 6 minutes. He said, time for another one. Boom. About the fourth one, it hit that barn. There was no mines in that barn. Everybody had a different idea. And I thought, what in the world am I doing here?
Describe the relationship between the 12th Armored Division and the French civilians that you encountered when you went across France.
Oh, the French welcomed us with open arms. We was chasing the Germans out of their country. They were friendly. I couldn't understand them, but they didn't. We had laughed in the same lingo.
What, describe your partner and how your crew worked. You were a messenger, so you had a driver with you. Describe what he was like.
Well, the first one was scared to the dark, and after I got the second one, he didn't seem to be scared of nothing. I guess I was too dumb to be scared, except when something was popping.
What experiences did you have with any casualties?
Well, the first casualties I saw was we went into an area where somebody else pulled back, and they picked up two of our 66 infantry men, and there was a German there, German soldier, and they checked him out, and he had a kind of funny dog tag. And I went up there and looked at that, and there was the name of a person, our neighbor, Herman Raymond. Then I turned around and somebody said, what happened to you? I said, I just saw my neighbor laying there. And I didn't look at any more of them Germans.
What was your experience with the Battle of Herlstein for you?
Herlstein, well, it was one of these clerks in Message Center rode with me, and we tried to get to, I don't know whether it was 43rd or one of the tank battalions. And then we got cut off, and it was at night. And I didn't know whether we was going to get out of there or not, but we did eventually. Looked like mass confusion right there. Nobody knew nothing about what was going on. We knew what was going on. The Germans left the Battle of the Bulge and they tried to break through down there. lost most of their tanks up there. But them was SS troops down there in Herlisheim. And they was kind of dirty. They didn't play fair. Well, nothing's fair, I guess.
Did you describe your experience with the German POWs?
I didn't have too much contact with
Did you have anything, or were you near any of the liberation of the death camps or the labor camps?
them. Well, they turned some of those, opened some of those death camp things. And these people were just starved. And I talked to one of them. I could talk a little bit of German. And I talked to one of those guys, and he just looked like he didn't have a bit of flesh on him anymore. And he said that they gave him sea rations, and that the one people were alive. And he said everybody got real sick. And an officer came by, and he said his buddies are mostly dead. You know, it seemed awful cruel that they'd treat a human being like that.
Describe the operation at Colmar.
Colmar, well, I didn't agree with that film out there altogether. There was some big guns, but I thought they were real guns. Mama could have been wrong. He probably knew what he was talking about. But I had to take a warrant officer up to, General was Patch. No, it wasn't Patch. I forget what his name was. One-star general. We had to go up there and see him. There was tanks on fire. It was early in the morning. We just barely got to Colmar, but we went on when they closed that pocket. And we run over something sharp and lost a tire. And he wanted to drive back. He said, it's emergency. And I said, I got to fix that tire. The spare's already flat. He said, drive back anyway. And I said, I'm not paying for a tire. He said, I'll see to it that you don't. I got back and they really gave me a 3rd degree till I give him that note that he gave me. And there was small arms fire there yet, but the big guns had ceased. The French army didn't seem too efficient. We were in the French army at that time. It didn't look like they were too efficient. Maybe I had them sized up wrong.
What do you remember about the treatment of German civilians after your unit entered Germany?
I didn't understand the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. When you entered Germany with your unit, what do you remember about the German civilians? How did they react to y'all being there?
Well, they wanted to be friendly, and we had a no fraternization thing. We weren't supposed to talk to them. And it would have worked, probably would have worked wonders, but they couldn't keep you from talking to them. They didn't know what you was talking about as a rule.
How did you witness, what was the treatment like of most German civilians?
I don't know. We didn't, after the war ended, that was in May, first part of May, and right after payday, the 1st of July, we hadn't been paid for about 3 months. Everybody had allotments and they didn't get a whole lot at one time. And then they sent us, they broke up the division and we went to Belgium in infantry training. It looked like we was going to the Pacific Theater. They considered signal company service people. Well, we got more things. We got shot at more than some of them other units, but they figured we was service people. Anyway, the atomic bomb stopped our infantry training, and we didn't go to Japan. It looked like they was going to invade the Japanese homeland, and I'm sure glad they didn't, because it would have been worse.
Describe your duties during the occupation time.
I didn't get into much of the occupation. It was pull some guard duty there in Heidenheim. It didn't last too long. Other people was in the occupation. I don't even think I even was classified as an occupant. I don't know.
When did you realize during the war that America, was going to win the war?
Well, I figured we was going to win all along, but I just didn't know whether I was going to make it to the end. That's my worry. I thought about it at times, for sure. Especially when the artillery was popping.
During the war, did you lose any of your friends that you knew about?
Yeah, there was some lost, but they whisked them away, and you didn't know whether they lived or were just wounded a little bit. They got the Americans wounded out of there pretty quick. Sometimes the Germans laid there for quite a while.
What did it feel like to you? You said that you talked to one of the death camp prisoners. What were your feelings when you were talking to him?
I just couldn't believe it was that inhuman to a human being.
Did he describe anything that he had been through, or?
I don't think so.
When you returned home, how did you feel and what happened?
Well, when I returned home, well, they let the old men, they flew them home first, the older. And then they had a point system. Somebody's married and with children, they got out first. By the time I got out, there wasn't no jobs, and I was on train for anything. And there really weren't any jobs to be had. And some of our neighbors, they give me a kind of a funny look, like, that killer's back, or is he going to take some farmland away from me? And some of these people, there was a bootlegger and a guy that spent a lot of time in jail, and he come up and just welcomed me with open arms, several of those. I thought, well, I didn't belong in that category, but I guess that's what they figured I did. So.
How has the war affected your life, of being involved in the military?
Well, it didn't affect me too much. I think, I heard a guy say war brings prosperity, and I was talking to a fellow out there in the audience, and we figured that between the depression and unemployment and my dad dying, and I got a stepdad that didn't think too much of me, except getting some work out of me, and that we lived in the best time of the country, because most farmers, they didn't accumulate more than 160 acres of land in a lifetime. And I married a woman that she lost her husband, and I didn't marry till I was 30. And she was older, a little bit younger than me, and we accumulated more than any of the former generation accumulated. I got some oil pumping job, and we had a cattle operation, and everything was in our favor after about 40. So we lived in a good time, and there wasn't any drugs to speak of, and there wasn't crime like there is now. And young kids got it a lot rougher than we had it rough, but then there's no cure for what's going on now. I don't see it. That's my version of it now. Somebody else might think different.
So after the war, where did you live at and stay?
Well, I had my stomach was giving me trouble, and there wasn't no job, so I went home to where my stepdad and mother lived. And he had a stroke after I was home a few months. And I bought a neighbor's farm equipment, cattle. And I farmed my home place too. And that was, and then farming got kind of rough, and cattle went no price. And I happened to pick up this oil pumping job, and oil was cheap at that time, $3.30 a barrel, and they didn't pay much. But I rode this price range up. It got to $33 a barrel, and they were slow to raise my wages, but they did raise them and act like I was going to quit. And then when the oil prices dropped a little bit, they couldn't drop my wages as slowly as they raised them, so they let me go. Terminated me. So, but I was near 65, so it didn't hurt me. I really benefit from oil. We didn't get any oil on our property. We got some big wells right next to us. 3 of our neighbors got oil, but I did get to pump some of those wells. And but we got salt water, dry oil.
What is the one experience about World War II that stands out in your mind more than anything else?
I don't know. Take life as it comes, I guess.
Okay, well, that's all I have to ask.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well,